South Africa has been grey-listed by the global financial watchdog, the Financial Action Task Force. In a statement, the FATF also announced the grey-listing of Nigeria and other nations. South Africa and Nigeria are among the biggest economies, and there's a ray of hope for South Africa, however, if it implements the recommendations of the FATF. In a statement, the global financial watchdog says South Africa has made significant progress on many of its recommendations to improve its systems. It says South Africa will work to implement the FATF's action plan, which includes improving risk-based supervision and ensuring the effective implementation of targeted financial sanctions, among others. For more on this, I am joined by economist Dawie Roodt. Thank you so much for joining us on Point, Dawie. Obviously, very much expected. We have been running the story that this is likely going to happen, but also quite an indictment on South Africa's anti-money laundering laws. Where have we failed as a country to find ourselves in this position?
Well, I'm afraid we haven't done enough. We haven't done enough to counter things like, for example, money laundering and financing of terrorist organizations. And, of course, our partners at the Financial Action Task Force, they see this in a very serious light. I was actually hoping that we could, we will not be grey-listed. And I know that the Minister of Finance made some money available to make sure that that we put certain measures in place to move us back to the white list again. But this is certainly not good news for South Africa, and I can see that the rand is under a lot of pressure this afternoon. But additional to that, I've just learned that the Americans are proposing to reconsider their relationships with South Africa. And I think that is a contributing reason why the rand is under pressure at the moment. The Americans mentioned, for example, our military training with the Russians and with the Chinese and many other regions as well. And there is certainly a possibility that South Africa will be kicked off the so-called AGOA Act from the Americans. So the combination of two things here, the grey listing as well as the possibility of South Africa moving losing its status as a member of AGOA, those two factors are certainly weighing on the exchange rate of the currency. And if that should in fact happen, I'm afraid it's going to be very bad news for the South African economy.
Yeah, I want to drill down to that possibility of us being kicked out of AGOA. Of course, that will impact a lot of people, among those the Poultry Association. Please do tell us more about what other implications we are likely to see for an economy that's already quite fragile.
Well, fragile is perhaps not the right word. Terribly sick is perhaps a better word. The South African economy, the Minister of Finance expects economic growth around about 1% this year. The Reserve Bank expects economic growth closer to zero. And with where we have load shedding at the moment, we're probably not going to see economic growth whatsoever this year. It's probably going to be negative. And on top of all of this, the benefits that we get from exporting to the United States, and the United States is a significant partner, trading partner to South Africa, means that will also weigh on economic growth in South Africa. And they mentioned also reasons why they're reconsidering the relationship with South Africa. Of course, politics plays an important role here. They're referring to the military exercise between South Africa and China and Russia as an example, but they're also referring to the mismanagement of Eskom by the South African government. So there are a combination or a number of reasons why the Americans consider of removing us from perhaps AGOA. If that should happen, I'm afraid a very, very sick economy may dip into a recession. And in fact, that is what, at the moment, with the information that I have available, I think chances are quite great that we are going to see a recession in the South African economy, or at least very weak economic growth for quite a long period of time.
Yeah, we definitely cannot afford to have a weaker economy. That forecast most likely going to be revised even further downwards. Earlier on, Dawie, I did speak to economists about their views on the grey listing. It is rather entrepreneurs that I spoke to about grey listing, and they're quite concerned. Is this likely to impact on their ability for accessing of new markets?
Yes, that is where the problem is. I mean, it's quite. I'm in the financial services industry, and let me give you some practical examples. If I, for example, want to arrange for a client of mine to export or to move capital in and out of South Africa, or to import or export, or whatever the case might be, you have to open bank accounts, you have to open accounts at stockbrokers, for example, and they always ask questions and they ask for a lot of documentation. Now they're going to ask for even more. And quite often what happens is that they're simply going to say, listen, I don't want to do business with you because you are grey-listed. I want to rather do business with another country where I don't have to go through this schlep, through this red tape. and getting all this information. So it will affect us at two levels, basically. The one is in terms of trade and financial flows to facilitate trade, and secondly, on capital flows as well. Capital flows means investments in and out of South Africa. Whenever you put obstacles in the way of business people, quite often what they do is say, listen, this is too much trouble. I'm going to go away. I'm going to start doing business with another country, and we lose that business. And that's something that we as a country, without any economic growth at the moment, we certainly cannot afford that.
I can imagine what the rating agencies are going to be saying after this. We can definitely expect a note from them. What do you think they would say?
Yes, quite often what happens is that if there is a grey listing of a country, quite often that goes hand in hand with a downgrade as well. Now, I listened to the Minister of Finance yesterday on his budget speech, as an example, or the day before on his budget speech. He's got a certain trajectory on certain of those fiscal matrix, like, for example, the debt and the deficit relative to GDP. And with an economy that's not growing or perhaps performing much weaker than what the minister expected, we may get a downgrade in any event. And on top of this, we've got the down or the grey listing as well. So I'm afraid chances are quite good that we could see a further downgrade. In fact, that is usually what has happened to other countries that got grey listed as well. So a further downgrade is certainly not off the table.
Dawie Roodt, thank you so much for always availing yourself to speak to us at the SABC. We really appreciate it. I've been speaking to Dawie Roodt. The latest news coming out of the Financial Action Task Forces that South Africa has been greylisted. Dawie Roodt telling us that this will have an impact, obviously, on the already what he terms a very sick economy, and obviously also sharing with us that South Africa stands a chance of being kicked out of the AGOA system by the Americans also, which will also have an impact on us.